Hello, good morning and welcome. My name is Craig Smith and welcome to React, Refine and Reset. My role at Jamf is the Senior Education Manager for the UK and Ireland. However, today I am your host and facilitator. My main objective is to make sure that you get the most out of this event, and it's very much a conversation, not a lecture. With that in mind, please make sure that you post your questions in the panel below, as we do have some great speakers for you today. So what are we here to discuss? Well, we believe, as many, we have been presented with this sort of accidental opportunity because of the pandemic to really transform education for the better. And we also believe that technology will be a driving force to help really propel things forward. COVID has presented us with a huge challenge, and everyone globally has felt that. Education has been forced to react to ways to work that we've never really expected. And as we progress through the pandemic, adapting and discovering what works and perhaps what doesn't work, we're now really refining our strategies. And we have a fantastic group of education leaders who will share their stories, experience, and insight with you today. So why Jamf? What is our role in all of this? Well, Jamf is a company with education firmly in its DNA. We were actually born in the University of Wisconsin with a desire to easily help get Apple technology into the hands of students and teachers. And that ethos remains absolutely true today, and I'm very proud to say that Jamf empowers over 11 million learners and teachers with Apple technology. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague actually, and our first guest, Aaron Webb. Aaron, good morning.
Morning, Craig.
How are we doing?
I'm good, thank you.
I see we got the memo and we've sort of dressed the same, so we're very much on company brand this morning, which is fantastic. So Aaron, you recently joined Jamf, but until very recently, you were working within education, and in fact, have worked on a number of interesting projects with Apple technology. I wonder if you could just tell the audience a little bit about your background and some of the projects that you've worked on.
Yeah, so I started working for Hackney Learning Trust, and that was as a project manager role. And it started off as a learning platform position until 2011 when a set of iPads dropped on my desk from the IT director, and he said, make these work in education. It was a very exciting time because the iPads had just come out. It was a great opportunity to see what they could do in the classroom. But there was lots and lots of barriers. Trying to get apps onto the devices was very difficult. There was no platforms that we have now that make that a lot easier for people. But it was a great opportunity to be able to take a small number of iPads, a set of 6, put them into different schools, and then also see what the impact was of that. So we started off with a reading project, 6 iPads, see how that had an impact in terms of reading. And then we also had a one-to-one deployment where we put 30 iPads into a number of schools, and to see what the impact of a one-to-one iPad rollout would be. I worked quite closely with the teachers and the leaders in that school, and that momentum grew and got a lot more focus from other schools who wanted to try this out. It expanded quite quickly. Moving from that role, I then went into a federation of 3 schools to see what that would look like actually being embedded into the school itself. Again, that started with a small set of devices, growing that, showing the impact, working out how these devices could work in the classroom, but very much sitting with the teachers, coaching them, modelling, taking risks, and really seeing what was working and what wasn't. There was so many different apps out there that we needed to try. Until we eventually got to a point where we wanted to come up with a core set of apps. We knew it was about workflows that really made a difference. Trying to make that technology as transparent as possible so that it really helped the teachers embed it. And then we grew that out. That school became an Apple Distinguished School. And then I moved to a one-to-one deployment, both Mac and iPad in Hackney, Holy Trinity. And that was really a chance to explore how one-to-one devices and the Apple ecosystem really worked, and that became an Apple Distinguished School back in 2018. I'm an Apple Distinguished Educator from 2013, and I've been working with a lot of these guests that we've got today over the years of me working with technology in schools.
some great points there, and I'm sure we'll dig into some of this during the panel discussion and the Q&A. But I definitely want to pick back up on that point around a core set of apps and workflows, and I think that will be really key for a lot of people that are considering how they move things forward now as they work to maybe a blended approach as we sort of come out of the pandemic and look for new opportunities. A point to pick up on there, you mentioned that you've worked with a number of today's panelists, and one thing they have in common, at least, is they have all led or are currently leading one-to-one iPad deployments, iPad programs across their sort of respected institutions. So Aaron, I'll come back to you in a little while. Thanks very much for sharing at the moment, but we're now going to introduce our next guest. So Abdul, I believe you're on the line.
Hi everyone, how you doing? Hi Craig, how are you?
Good, thank you, Abdul. Great to see you as always. And I believe you're actually dialing in from Istanbul today.
I certainly am. Dodgy hotel Wi-Fi and everything.
Well,
yeah.
We'll forgive you if you do sort of a freeze, but hopefully we'll be okay. But Abdul, you and I have known each other for many years now. And probably people that know you will know you for some of the one-to-one iPad learning programs. And I know you were always keen to say these are not technology programs, they're all about teaching and learning. And that was always at the forefront of why you did anything with technology. But for people that maybe don't know you, I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of sort of your history, and then actually I'd be really keen to talk about what you're doing right now.
Okay, so that's kind of going back some years, but really we started looking at a family learning project back in my hometown in Bolton in the UK many years ago. And the idea was that how can we expand learning opportunities for students, for families within quite a deprived part of the UK beyond school hours. So it wasn't just in school, it was beyond school hours. And one of our key approaches was using technology to give access to students and families, not just when they're in school, but when they're outside school. So that was probably the first large scale project of its kind. And I kind of then went on to support other schools, other organizations as well. I was part of a school that was founded on these same principles, again, in my hometown as well. And then for the last 5 years or so, I've been working with different schools, some ministries of education as well, to kind of really understand how technology can amplify the learning experience. What can the technology allow us to do now that we couldn't do in the past? And, you know, that's then kind of brought me on to kind of working with a variety of different organizations. And more recently, I've been working quite closely with Shobi, and I'm currently the Vice President of Learning at Shobi, and that's allowing me to have even more conversations about how technology can be massively influential for teaching and learning.
And for me, it was no surprise to see that your involvement with Shobi. I know it's something that you've been passionate about for many years, and particularly around voice and video feedback. And I'm sure that's something we're going to dig into as the event goes on. But I wonder if you could maybe just touch on that briefly.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been a learning curve for myself as well, like working in different communities everywhere from island communities, Mauritius, Maldives, which sound really exotic, but bring challenges as far as education and connectivity is concerned, to also countries like India, where there's an upcoming middle income kind of country, where communities want to be connected. There's huge aspirations for learning, right down to kind of, the UK, where, connectivity is easier in some ways. But I think one of the kind of trends I'm kind of seeing is it's the use of technology to allow us to connect as humans, that's becoming massively powerful. So the use of voice and video for me is a kind of really powerful element. And certainly during the lockdown and what we've experienced over the last 18 months, this is something that's kind of come through. And I think that apart from having lots of other operational kind of advantages. I think the type of technology that we have now, the kind of simplicity and reliability that we can use it with, gives us opportunities in ways that simply just were not possible in the past.
Yeah, fantastic. No, that's a really good overview, and I think we'll definitely be digging into that a lot further. So Abdul, thanks very much for that introduction. We will come back to you in a short while. And now I think we want to bring on our next guest, Catherine. Catherine, good morning.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Lovely to be here.
Thanks very much for joining us. Catherine, I wonder, similar to what we just did with Abdul, I wonder if you just give us a little bit of your sort of history in terms of your career, but also specifically around the sort of education technology piece, and then bringing it right up to what you're doing at the moment, which is really interesting, and I'm sure we'll go into that in a bit more detail.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm head teacher here at Holy Trinity Primary School in Hackney. I've actually been in teaching for over 15 years and became the head in March. So yeah, just as the pandemic hit. I'm the specialist leader in education, Apple's English educator, and very much similar to Aaron, my time with technology actually began about a decade ago in 2012. At the time, the local authority identified me as being innovative with technology, which basically meant I used my interactive whiteboard. And so issued us with initially 30 iPads, but I argued we needed 31 because actually as the adult in the room, I needed one too. And we were able to sort of really run a project within the classroom to sort of see how learning could be changed through the use of technology. As I said, it was back in 2012, so we had the Olympics as well on our doorstep, and it just gave us an opportunity to take learning outside of the classroom and for children to really take control of how they shared their learning. And I think for me, that was the point at which, as a classroom teacher, I could start to see the difference that having that tool within the classroom could make to those children and their learning experience, but also how it altered me as a teacher. It was very different back then. Back then, literally, I was plugging in every single iPad into one MacBook and setting it up. We've come a very, very long way since then. So back in 2014, when I was deputy head, I was tasked with designing the vision and plan for a new building that we were moving into within the same school. And so from September 2016, when we moved into that new building, we went one-to-one with iPad across Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, and with a complete Mac infrastructure as well. So effectively the way that I saw it, it would work because we had everything sort of speaking the same language. Don't get me wrong, there were some technical hitches along the way, but the position that we're in now and through using G Suite for Education as well, it meant that in March, when we were starting to begin to see the way that things may go for schools, we were able to flip the learning in our classrooms quite quickly and quite easily. We were already sharing content with our children through Google Classroom, and they were sharing it back with us in that way. So we were able to invite parents in back when we were allowed to have them in the same room, and children were bringing in their devices and we were getting them logged in, and they were able to take those home and go from there. So yeah, we've come a long way in a long time, but then also a long way in a very short time as well.
Short time as well, absolutely. And your school, as I've had the pleasure of spending a couple of days there. It is such a fantastic school, amazing building. And what I love about it, it blends the traditional with what people might call the traditional, or with technology, and it just seems absolutely seamless. And I love I love the chickens and all the animals there as well. And it's such an amazing school. One thing I want to ask about was, you mentioned there about that sort of transition. You're able to flip the learning quite easily. And this is something that I've been hearing quite a lot. I was at an Apple Distinguished Schools event last week where other schools were sharing their stories that actually the learning in the classroom looked quite similar to what learning would be at home. Okay, obviously the big difference is the teacher isn't there. I just wonder if that was the same sort of for your school and how you were able to sort of transition really quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that what we were doing in sort of March, April, May is very different to what we were then doing in January when we closed again. The sort of the content that was being shared was very much teacher-led. And what we learned in that first lockdown really was that actually we were able to use some of the fantastic resources that are already out there and spend much more of our teacher time either in small groups or one-to-one, working with children, and rather than having sort of live streaming lessons all the time, but actually going for sort of check-ins at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, sort of to allow that, you know, that dialogue between children and their teachers. However, actually the power of the video, which Abdul touched on, to be able to sort of pause something, rewind something, rewatch something is very powerful. It means that if you can't access it at that point in the day, or if you've misunderstood something, you can't rewind your teacher, but you can rewind a video that your teacher's potentially made, or a video that's already out there that the teacher's then able to share with you. So one of our biggest changes, I think, from that first lockdown to this one in January was actually how our teachers were spending their time. So they were spending far less time creating content and far more time actually responding to children and working with children, be it either in the classroom or be it via Google Meets at home.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know we touched on this before when we chatted offline around accessing pre-prepared high quality content and also stuff that teachers will create themselves. And I think there's obviously, you'd mentioned there's definitely value of having both. And I think that's a subject we'll definitely dig into as we move along. So Catherine, thanks very much. We will bring you back in very shortly. And I now want to introduce our next guest, and that's Andrew Joe. Andrew, good morning.
Hi, Craig.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm very well. Did you join us from sunny Greenock this morning?
Yep, sunny Greenock. We're basking in the 10-degree temperatures at the moment, and unusually it's not raining.
Fantastic. Andrew, we go back even longer than I do with Abdul. I've known you for many years. Had the pleasure of working with you more recently again on some fantastic projects. But just for the benefit of everyone here today, I wonder if you could just give us, again, this sort of a little bit of history of your involvement with education technology and some of those cool projects you've worked on, and then right up to stuff that you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into the technology in education. I've been a teacher since about 96, 97, something like that. And really thoroughly enjoyed being in the classroom, absolutely loved teaching and working with the kids. And in that time used many different types of technology, and probably the way that we all did, you know, that the technologies that kind of came in and mostly went and sometimes ended up in the cupboard and not very well used. And in 2010, we planned to do a one-to-one program with iPod, actually, in the school that I was working in, and there was a number of kind of staff that had very significant kind of queries about the significance of that and whether or not it would actually be a valuable thing to do, and the size of the keyboard and all that stuff. And about 2 weeks after the discussion around about that, Apple in California announced the iPad for the first time, and it was a groundbreaking moment. It really was, because you know, we were looking at the world outside the classroom and our school, and we were seeing kids starting to kind of like interact with mobile technology and have technology in their pockets in the form of phones and iPods. And that for us was the moment that it really came into the school in a big way. And we changed from having a room where you went to do technology, or you kind of like, that's where you experience technology in the curriculum really, to a much more personal approach. And it made a transformational difference. And to me as a teacher, it made an enormous difference. I just saw something that I'd never seen before in terms of the power and the potential impact of technology in the classroom, and how engaging it was for young people to pick up a tool that was so kind of deeply connected to their culture and the world around them, and actually bring it to the heart of learning. And that was really the start of my journey. And I kind of came out of the classroom part-time. I began to do projects in various parts of the world and support education events in various parts of EMEA. And more recently then ultimately and very, very happily really began to work on large-scale projects in Scotland, where obviously I'm from. So that being Glasgow. which is a project that covers all 300 schools in Glasgow initially. It's a one-to-one project, one of the largest, I think, in Europe. And then more recently in the Scottish Borders, which is a place I'd never really been to. I've probably driven through it, but never really visited or been to before until a couple of years ago. And we started the Inspire Learning project, and that is something that is possibly one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of the work that I've ever been involved in, and absolutely passionate and excited about as we move forward. So yeah, that's the journey. It's a journey that I still find very motivating, incredibly exciting. And I think these kind of conversations we're having now are conversations which kind of form part of a tipping point, really, especially with the impact of the pandemic. From a global perspective, I think conversations around about technology and education have gone from almost being part of a side conversation and now are very much at the forefront of all of our thoughts around what does education look like for our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. So yeah, it's a very, very rewarding and exciting part of life to be involved in.
Definitely. Couple of points to pick up on there. It was interesting talking about the iPod Touch. And I remember Abdul actually at one of his former schools, they did sort of proceed with an iPod Touch, but this was pre-iPad, of course, but saw a lot of the potential there of things like the App Store and being able to record your voice. And just as you say, having the internet and a device in your pocket that was sort of multimodal, that could do so many different things. But I think, as you say, when the iPad came out, particularly the iPad 2, when they added the camera, and I think that's when people really grasped hold of it. And I like that you said your sort of passion for learning, that's something that's a passion for teaching, is something that's always remained true. I remember an event that we did back in the Apple Store many years ago, and Andrew had like a whole huge audience of teachers singing along with, we were doing some sort of GarageBand thing, I think, and I can't remember what we were singing. It was all lang
I can remember it, but I'm not going to give you a rendition.
No, I won't ask you for that. Don't
Nobody signed up for
that. No, absolutely not. That's not the content we're here for. But yeah, and then right up to today, Scottish Borders at Glasgow, too. Really interesting programs. Something that we're involved in as well, and it's been fantastic to really work with everyone involved in those programs, of course, with yourself. And important to point out that these are all sort of pre-pandemic. These were not our response to this. Wasn't, we should do this because of. Yeah,
and actually that's changed the narrative massively for us. I mean, obviously, serious and important questions are asked when you do a project that is ultimately as expensive as some of the projects that I've been involved in. People are like, well, you need to show value there, and quite rightly. But obviously the narrative has changed significantly over the course of the past year, really due to the impact of the pandemic. And we were concerned all along to make sure that we had equity of access to the same great tools for learning for everybody, irrespective of your background, your postcode, what your parents do for a living, how many devices you might have in your home. So delivering that equity has been absolutely pivotal to what education's looked like in these particular areas over the past year. So yeah, and in that sense, Craig, very rewarding. Although, like you say, it was never done as a kind of response to the pandemic. It was much more about future thinking and thinking about the world in which these young people ultimately need to thrive, that we put these projects in place in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just sort of underscores the importance of it now that we're in this sort of COVID or post-COVID world, hopefully shortly. That on the sort of, you mentioned sort of budget side there, and we've obviously seen governments around the world almost sort of just writing blank checks for and which is fantastic to see. Do you think or do you hope that the budget conversation will not go away, because it's always going to be there, but it'll be less of a concern because money will be either prioritized or made available?
I mean, I suppose I'm a little nervous around that whole this kind of whole kind of response thing, and not because I think, I mean, obviously technology has been fundamentally necessary over the past year, and it's been necessary to provide that, especially in situations where, you know, there are numbers of young people that are vulnerable and don't have access to ultimately to learning. So, you know, fundamentally important. I think where we just need to try as best as we can to be careful is the strategic element that underpins that technology. And like I said at the beginning, you know, I've seen many examples of technology come and go through my hands as a teacher in the classroom, and really come and go with very little kind of like impact, really. And so I think one of the things that I genuinely do feel passionately about is the value that we see from what we do with technology, and how we realize that value, and how we make sure that value is really kind of drilled down to every young person that touches the technology, that they see it, that they value it, that they interact with it, and that they can kind of see a direct impact really for them as a learner, as an end user, as if you like, of the technology. So yeah, I mean, the budget conversation, hopefully and possibly it will be a little bit easier going forward. But I still think there's a huge requirement on us to demonstrate value and strategic value in terms of the way we put these projects in place.
Absolutely. And again, we will undoubtedly dig into that as we bring you all back together. But before we do that, we do have one final panelist, last but by no means least. We have Jenny Dunn. Good morning. Good morning, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Hi, yeah, very well, and thanks very much for joining us, Jenny. I will ask you, as I've done with other panelists, just to give us a little bit of sort of history of your career, how you got sort of involved in education technology, and your role at the moment, and how you're using technology.
Okay, so I'm the Executive Director of Learning for Newbridge Multi-Academy Trust, and we are a collection of schools, and all of our schools cater for young people with SEND, and there's a huge spectrum. We have young people on the autistic spectrum who are non-verbal, all the way up to young people who are capable of achieving GCSEs. We have schools that cater for young people with profound and multiple learning difficulties, and young people who have social, emotional and mental health needs. So we've got a huge range of young people within our organisation with a vast range of needs. I've been teaching within the SEND sector for 15 years and within education for 21 years. And as it was said previously, I've seen technology come, go, been part of successes and failures. And I think it's really important, the journey we've taken, if we've had failures, we've reflected on them and then looked at how can we make it a success. So we did start a small one-to-one project and it failed. And when we unpicked it, it was because we hadn't got that clear vision, we hadn't got the infrastructure, we hadn't got the CPD all wrapped around that for it to work. So we really, really reflected on that. And about 5 years ago, our CEO went over to America and was working with some contacts with Apple, saw some great projects. He came back and said, you've got 18 months to get one-to-one into every single school. We want iPads in every young person's hand and every teacher and TA's hand. And we want to really use it to enhance that teaching and learning. So we undertook the project and we rolled it out at schools at different points so that we could learn from each school's journey and enhance and make it smoother into each school as it came along. It has been a really, really exciting journey, and we have learned from things that have gone right. We've reflected, we've engaged and built partnerships with people to make sure that the heart of the technology really does enhance teaching and learning. We look at teaching and learning in a real holistic way. So yes, we've got the academic side that is crucial, and that's what we do. But also at the heart of it, is what does that look like for life, that lifelong learning and the world our young people are living in and are going to live in when they move on from us. So that's a little bit about sort of the history of how we sort of set it all up. I will touch on the here and now. So in March, when the pandemic struck, we were at a great advantage that all of our young people had been using one-to-one, had been using iPads in school with their teachers, with their TAs. We hadn't thought about what this would look like at home. So when we got told we were closing, we sent every young person home with their iPad, and then we set about what did we need to do to make sure teaching and learning could still happen at home, and there was that engagement of every single young person. And again, that was a huge task because of the range of needs of all of our young people. We very, very quickly met as a team, and we got communications out to families on how they could support their young person and how the iPad was going to allow them to engage in teaching and learning. We tried lots of things, and paramount was safety and safeguarding of our young people. So we needed a platform that we could stream videos, that we could do live lessons, that we could have that face-to-face conversation with young people and their families. And we did lots of research very quickly, and our IT teams were amazing in doing the back research, whilst teachers were able to carry on teaching and TAs supporting young people, albeit virtually. And we did end up going with Shobi, and the reason for that is we felt we had control and we were able to safeguard our young people. As soon as we invested in the Shobi Pro, we were able to start doing live lessons and videos, and it really opened up that teaching and learning to the next level. It wasn't just sending work home and receiving work back in school. It was that pure engagement factor of videos and live lessons. It's pretty much been the same in this lockdown, apart from our schools weren't closed. So all young people with an EHCP had a place in school. And we were roughly working on 50-50. So 50% of our young people in, 50% choosing to stay at home as that was family wishes, or they were shielding. And we set about that. All lessons were remote. Whether you were in school or you were at home, you would receive the same lesson, live lesson via the iPads. And again, that was hugely successful. And we've had really, really positive feedback from all of our families. We've had huge successes with our young people with social, emotional, mental health, who find it really hard to engage at 8:30 in the morning. But when we were doing live lessons at 10 and 10:30, they were online and they were engaging. So again, something we really, really need to reflect on. Another success is a small reading project that we've done that's had a huge impact on some of our primary school children. And the teacher who's leading that is actually shielding at the moment, but she's working from home and still continuing the reading project whilst the young people are back in school. And previously, if a member of staff was off or at home for a reason, it would have been really difficult for them to have an impact in school and in the classroom. So that's been a huge success. Another success is that parental engagement. We've had huge engagement from our families and real positive feedback. So at the moment, we're at the point of pressing pause just for a second to reflect on everything we've been through in the pandemic and how it's almost propelled the one-to-one project, because we've had to, and what bits of that do we need to take forwards to move the project on even further?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's loads that we can dig into there, and we certainly will once we bring you all back together. A couple of things I wanted to touch on. So what I'm hearing here is the importance of having a strategic plan, and not just sort of putting technology in. And I think there'll be a lot of people watching today and maybe watching on the recording who have maybe had devices provided to them, which is fantastic. But I think they've now got an opportunity to, as schools reopen, as they have, to really sort of plan that out and how they want to take things forward. Also, you made a great point around you've got teaching and learning, and you've got the IT people that are part of the organisation, not always do they come together to work together for the greater good, and quite often their priorities can be different. I've certainly found that speaking with a lot of multi-academy trusts recently, but having that holistic view and coming together is so vital, as I think you've demonstrated extremely well there. With that, I would like to bring everyone back into the room, and we'll sort of get the discussions going as we move into the sort of next part of the event. So welcome back, everyone. Thanks very much for your great introduction. So much stuff to dig into there. There really is. I'm thinking, where do we start? You've given me a really difficult job to actually pick that out. But I think I'll start with we touched on obviously the pandemic and how you've had to adapt and change. What would you say has been the biggest barrier to teaching and learning shifting to either, as Jenny mentioned, that 50-50 approach, the blended approach, or a complete remote learning? Andrew, I'm looking at you, so I'm going to.
I was like, who's it going to pick on? Who's it going to pick on with you? Obviously, I mean, it's changed everything, really, hasn't it? I mean, for us, I think for all of us, in some degree, a big part of our job was to advocate for the power of technology in the hands of teachers. And sometimes you were dealing with teachers across a whole spectrum of confidence. And it was about developing that confidence and trying to convince them that technology had a really positive role to play in the classroom. And that, in essence, has changed because everybody's been using technology as the fundamental delivery mechanism for learning tasks over the past year. So there's been, that has happened, if you like, and done an awful lot of good, I think, in the progress. But I think that's also produced an amount of strain and stress on our teaching staff. And I think we found, like, being able to kind of try and support that, try and make strategic decisions about the technology that are ultimately based on the experience of our teachers and ultimately the experience of our learners has been one of the biggest challenges of the pandemic, to try and make sure that the technology we're refining what we're looking for so that we're really focusing on making people's life better with the technology and not just being an added strain and stress at a time when there's certainly enough to be strained and stressed about. So yeah, that's been one thing we've certainly focused quite a lot on in terms of our delivery mechanism and our support planning and stuff like that.
And would you share any particular methodologies that you've approached or implemented in terms of CPD or teacher confidence training, that sort of side of things?
Yeah, some of it is very much linked to the fundamentals of our program, and I work with an amazing team of people at the moment in the Inspire Learning program who are all fully kind of committed to the impact of this. But simple things like we talk about how sometimes in a world where a lot of the technology that we have, in essence, is good technology, in the sense that we're doing this via a kind of Zoom product. We could be using WebEx, or we could be using Teams, or there's a multiplicity of options, and they all work pretty well. They do kind of the same thing, and sometimes for us, particularly over the past wee while, it's not been so much the decision that you've made, but it's been the importance of making a decision. So not just having the kind of like doors open, do whatever you like kind of approach, but actually having a really strategic kind of like, okay, what we're going to do and what will make people's lives genuinely easier. So, in Scotland, we have a national learning framework in GLOW that all of our teachers are part of, and we've very much looked at trying to leverage the power of that. We've got all of our, in the Borders example, we've got all of our 1,500 odd staff enrolled in our Schoolhouse professional development program. We're offering a kind of weekly diet, effectively, of sessions on that, and they're tiered so that we've got a sort of skilled builder sessions, which are really about how do you actually do the things with the apps that you're wanting to use, and how do you do that. And then we've got the developing delivery sessions, which are more pedagogy focused and look at the impact on learners on how to kind of best practice really. And then we've got a set of kind of masterclass sessions that we're running with other schools that are doing similar projects and maybe are a little bit further down the line, to kind of really look and interrogate and dig down into how do we achieve best practice in some of these things. So I think you can maybe see something of that example of the importance of a strategic element that's focused on the end user. And I think it was actually Steve Jobs that talked about starting with the end user and working back to the technology, not the other way around. And we very much take that approach in the projects that I've been involved in. You know, what do we want the experience to be for the teacher, for the end user? And that's never been more important than it has been over the course of the past year.
Yeah, absolutely. And to pick up on your point, it's the importance of almost nailing your flag to the mast to say this is what we are going to use, and then having that consistency across the board so that everyone's on the same boat. We're all using the same thing. We can help each other. Jenny, you mentioned Shobi as your delivery mechanism. Catherine, you also mentioned about Google Classroom. So all we're using different things. Would you agree with that sort of statement? Has that been an advantage for you?
Yeah, I think we had to make that decision really soon on, and we wanted one platform that we knew our young people were already using Shobi, so they knew how to use it. But we had to nail our colours to the mast and say this is what we're using, because people were exploring different things. And my main concern with that was, actually, young people have got more than one teacher. And if one teacher's using Teams and one teacher's using Zoom and one teacher's using Shobi, it complicates that whole experience of teaching and learning.
Yeah, that's a great point. Catherine, is there something you would agree with as well in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say that we'd, again, sort of started that prior to the pandemic. So we'd already identified that you come into a school as a new teacher and there are so many different things you need to learn. So the more that you can streamline systems, the more that you can streamline where people are going for things or how people are doing things, the better, which is where we'd gone down the Google Classroom route. I would say the biggest change, though, when the pandemic came in was that, and again, the difference from the first one to the second one. So the first one, we had created blended learning classrooms for each classroom. So everything was posted in one place. But we were also doing the same for staff. So where we were sharing stuff around mental health and wellbeing, that was again done through a Google Classroom that the teachers and the staff were members of, or children, I suppose, of. And then we did the same with parents. So we were able to share pretty much all of our content through that one platform. And it just made it simple, where there was already so much going on, people already sort of scrabbling around to try and understand what was happening. To have all of that coming through one stream just made sense and worked. Yeah, and again, sort of going back to that sort of core set of apps, when we have teachers join us, when we are using the technology, trying to learn all the different things at once never works. So we've always had that sort of core set of 7 that are predominantly for delivery, that we spend a lot of time with our staff working around on how to use and how to utilise within the classroom. And again, then it meant that when the pandemic hit, we were able to sort of, people were confident using those. So although all of a sudden they were having to teach from home, or they were having to teach from school to children who were at home, they were in a position where, apart from that aspect of it, a lot of what they were doing wasn't new. And again, coming back to parents, it left them feeling more confident because they just knew everything was in one place. Then this time round, rather than doing that blended learning where we had one classroom, we actually stuck to the classrooms that already existed. So we had, English, we had maths, we had science, geography, etc. And again, the reason behind that this time was that actually what we were saying was, right, now we know this has happened again, it may happen again in the future, and what we want to be able to do is ensure that if we've got children at home shielding, families who are having to isolate, that actually they know that when they're doing maths, they go to the maths classroom and it's very much the same experience that they would be getting in the classroom. And that made a difference, I think, in terms of how the children were interacting within their learning, but also then the engagement that we had from home, because it was just so straightforward.
Yeah, I love that approach in terms of, it's almost what happens in the classroom is what's happening at home, and it's very, very similar. A point to pick up on there, you mentioned about parents. I did want to ask about how has parents reacted in terms of obviously the school closures, but remote learning, and I know a lot of parents who've maybe not had as much support from schools. How has your parents in your institutions reacted to that remote learning? What's the feedback been like from parents, and how are you engaging them? And I'll put that one to Jenny.
We've had really, really positive feedback. The first lockdown, we had to support a lot of our families in how to access the technology as the parents were unsure and unable to, and lots of our staff did phone calls and explained how to switch the iPad on and what all the functions were. As soon as the parents felt comfortable and confident, we've had brilliant support, and we've really tailored what learning has happened at home. So some young people found it really difficult because home is home and school is school. So we changed the teaching and learning that young person would get, and it was a lot more holistic. Some young people found it really difficult when they didn't have the structure of the timetable, like what was being said before. So we changed that. When it's maths, when it's English, and put more structure into it. And I think because parents were able to feed back to us and we responded to that, there was real engagement from our families. And also they felt supported. We weren't just picking up the phone and doing a welfare call. We were actually having a video call. So we had eyes on the young people, and parents could see a familiar face, and it was more personal than just that phone call home. So overall, I would say it's been positive.
And would you say the engagement's almost increased in some cases with parents?
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things we want to sort of harness and take forward with us. So we know we've got some families who really struggle to do things like reading books with their young people. And when we set up the reading programme, it was lovely because parents were actually coming online with their child and engaging in the reading and saying, we've done our homework. And I would say that engagement with families has definitely increased. A lot of our young people come into school on transport, so we don't have that face-to-face contact with parents as other schools do, and I think the lockdowns almost enhanced and enriched our parental engagement.
That's really interesting. That's something obviously definitely want to take forward. Abdul, I just want to bring you in here actually on this point. You mentioned some of the initiatives that you worked on in the past were very much family learning initiatives, and it wasn't about necessarily just the pupil, it was engaging the wider family. And I know that's always something that you've been passionate about. Do you see the device or the iPad as almost like a sort of little window into that child's learning?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of been really fascinating listening to everyone here around this. I think one of the things that definitely the idea of mobile technology, and I'm making a distinction between mobile technology and, say, portable technology, is that the fact that devices are going home, the fact that switching them on is just really quick. You're not kind of waiting for ages to things to boot up and log in and all that kind of stuff, means that the speed of access to information is a lot faster. You're not waiting around and so on. And what we then begin to see is that the way in which you kind of design that learning experience becomes such that parents can get involved, families can get involved without the typical frustrations of technology. And I think going back to what everybody else was saying around, having that consistency becomes really important for parents as well. If you have 3 children going to a school and all 3 children are using different tools with different teachers and so on, it becomes, from a parental perspective, becomes almost impossible to keep track of what's going on. And I think the pandemic certainly shown that, where people kind of started to use one particular platform or tool, and kind of that becomes their non-negotiable, if you want, kind of moving forward. Doesn't mean that you don't explore other things, but certainly having that approach really kind of lends itself to that parental engagement. I mean, there's a lot of research that the Education Endowment Fund has done around parental engagement and the impact that it has on children's learning, because parents are able to take part. Now, one of the things that I've certainly seen is when teachers are kind of, creating resources like model tutorials and things like that are just there, simple explanations that would normally happen in the classroom, but now they're captured and they're available not just for the student to watch as many times as they want, but the fact that parents can see how the teacher did long division and can support their child at home and have a meaningful conversation without all the frustrations. Actually, that can have significant impact on a variety of things, including how much progress that child makes, the relationship between the school, how parents feel towards what the school is doing, the relationship between the teacher, students, and parents. All of these things can get impacted significantly. So I think that consistency is definitely key. I think getting to a point where the school strategically understands which tools are we using and why are we using them. And I think that there's a lot of research that's been done in education about, what makes good learning, what is learning, and so on. There's a lot of things that are out there. Actually, there's a lot of technology that exists that can superimpose itself on top of that research, and really kind of add significant value to that. So we've seen a plethora of technology tools that allow for screen recording, and the fact that you could capture things and, the teacher's voice and explanations there. So suddenly we went from, death by PowerPoint, just slides after slides after slides, where actually you can take the PowerPoint, you can take a keynote presentation and suddenly turn it into a video with the teacher's voice and explanation and that screen recording element. Very simple to do, but then it's available for family, parents to be able to use. Now, where this becomes powerful is when it then becomes a non-negotiable. We know it works. We know it's making a difference. Does it now become part of our policy? Does it now become part of something that is how we're going to work, and so on? And I think that's when we begin to see really effective use of technology. It's powering learning, it's powering communities, it's making people feel that actually there's a meaningful approach to this, rather than, hey, it's just an add-on for something. It's actually is the essence of learning, really. And that's where, we're kind of beginning to kind of, access students that have those learning difficulties, students that, might be on the gifted and talented spectrum and kind of really need to be pushed on even further, and so on. I think that there's the whole opportunity and the whole kind of strategic approach to technology can now be significantly different. And certainly in my work at the moment, a lot of the leadership teams, certainly over the last 2 weeks of my travels that I've been speaking to, it's all been about the strategic development. What happens now after COVID? What are the great things that we've learned that we now need to kind of, make as part of our kind of DNA? It's got to be part of the way in which we use technology moving forward, and so on. So I think some really powerful lessons learned, but certainly from a family and parental engagement perspective, I'd probably argue that we probably have not seen the level of parental engagement in education in the way in which we've actually seen it that we've been forced into over the last 18 months. And there's some great examples of, great practice that actually we can keep, and there's lessons to be learned we can continue developing moving forward.
Yeah, great. Some great points there as well, Abdul. Thanks for sharing. I think to a point you made around the power of sort of teacher-created content, it's a teacher's voice, it's a teacher in the video, and to come back something to Catherine that you mentioned around trying to strike that balance between teachers spending time making content and teachers actually spending time engaging with those pupils. Catherine, I wonder if I could bring you back in on that point and just how you're approaching, how you've managed to try and strike that balance.
Yeah, so we had sort of, as is in the same way we would do when it's, normal school, we have people who are sort of checking in with lessons and seeing how things are going. And what we found was that there were some really amazing videos that were being made by some of our teachers. However, they were spending huge amounts of time on them. And actually, in terms of their children's learning, we know that it's the marking, it's the feedback, it's those discussions that you're having with the children that actually have a much bigger impact on their learning. So what we did was to approach using tools, using resources that were already out there. So for example, White Rose, we were able to use some of their videos, that then those children were able to get that learning. They could still do that pause, rewind, rewatch, all those things that were very powerful, but actually more time was spent by teachers, whether it was creating Google quizzes that then they could use to sort of check in on children's learning very quickly, but also time to sort of then have those one-to-ones, those meetings with children in sort of more of a teaching style. It was much more flipped learning. So we were getting children's feedback. They were completing the work, and then we were able to sort of assess, analyse, and then respond back to that. Interestingly, though, referring back to what Abdul was saying about teachers and adults creating content, what I love about the fact that children have these devices is that you almost get to see inside their minds in a way that actually, if you've got them using pen and paper, you can't in the same way. Some amazing opportunities to sort of, if they hit record as they're thinking, even if they're not talking, you can see what they're creating in front of them. And if it was something they'd done in a book, they may have rubbed it out and you then never see it. By being on a video, being recorded, unless they've obviously gone back and deleted that themselves as well, you have that opportunity to sort of see what they're thinking, which is so powerful as a teacher, and something that, there'd be very little chance as an adult with 30 children in a classroom that you would have that opportunity. So even with children in the classroom, having them using those devices where they're able to record what they're doing and explain their understanding, it's so much more powerful than them just writing a couple of sentences in a book in terms of their explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point around the sort of seeing that working out. And you're always told to show me how you got to the answer, not just the answer. But as you say, they can easily just rub it out and just put in the answer. And that power of video again, really coming to the forefront. We've had some great questions coming in, so please continue to put them in there. We will shortly move to the sort of audience sort of Q&A. Keep putting your questions in there. We will get to them. Don't worry. We're not ignoring you. I will stick to my objective to make this interactive. I promise you that. In terms of I kind of ask, if you like, what would you like to see of technology companies, software providers, people that are making these tools? Is there anything that you've kind of come across through the pandemic that you wish we had something that did this? If you're one kind of big ask, Andrew, I think I know you're kind of looking away, but I'm going to bring you in on this one. We've not heard from you for a while.
It's a massive question. I don't think there's not one thing that I don't think exists or that I'm aware of that doesn't exist in terms of a feature or an app. And obviously we've got huge powerful tools now in augmented reality recently kind of coming online and becoming available, and I think becoming increasingly relevant as well. So there's a lot of elements of that I'm very excited about what the next few years looks like. So I suppose it's not so much a feature or an app. I think it's more generally, I think, and you can see it with tools like Showbie, and there's a fundamental commitment to simplicity. And I think the more that we can support that and focus always on the end user and what this allows and facilitates rather than the interface, and I have to say, broadly speaking, I think that is a place where we are right now, that there's a kind of really fundamental focus on design in terms of software, and particularly on apps and on the iPad, and that is translating into real impact in the classroom. And that's something I'd love to just see that continue, that kind of relentless focus on simplicity.
Mm.
And the way that you can just get to what you want to do without kind of having to fight your way through the actual interface of what it is you're looking for. Technology has now been democratized to the point where it belongs to the world, and you shouldn't need a specific kind of techno geek kind of tag or personality even to use it. And so I suppose that would be what I would be looking for going forward.
And I suppose to kind of flip that question, do you think that there's a danger that there's there's too much out there, and we can't see the wood for the trees because there's just this kind of tsunami of ed tech and free trials and try our thing. We think it's amazing and it's going to help you. And I guess it kind of goes back to the point that you all made around core set of apps, nailing your colours to the mast, as Jenny said, and really making a decision like you mentioned, Andrew. I think it's really important. So I think we move into the last sort of half hour now. I want to sort of move on to the audience questions. There's some great ones coming in. We will try and get through as much of them as we can, but feel free to keep putting them in there. I'm going to start with this one because I think this encapsulates exactly what we're here to discuss brilliantly. So thanks to whoever put this one in. The question is, reflection and review are just as important as ensuring you have a plan at the start. So my question would be, as you have reflected and reviewing some of the methodologies you've been using during pandemic and as we move back into the kind of normal, what are the things that you want to keep doing and doing more of, and maybe some of the things that you think, well, actually that served the purpose when we were in a fully remote environment, but it's probably not something we're going to focus on. I think, Jenny, I'll pose that question to you first of all, if I may.
Yeah, I said before, we've kind of taken a moment just to pause, to do that reflection. We know there are certain things we definitely want to take forward. So we definitely want to take forward the videoing of teaching. And the reason for that, if we've got young people who are at home, not because of COVID, because they're poorly, having that bank of videos for morning routines and attention autism, families have told us that makes a huge difference to that young person's life, and almost opens a window up to the family members on how our staff work with their child and has a huge impact. So we are going to carry on with those videos and having banks of those with familiar staff, familiar voices that can support families when their young person is off for whatever reason. We're definitely going to look at how we keep iPads going home. So before the pandemic, iPads stayed in school and they weren't shared with home. That was something that we were really trying to figure out. And I think the pandemic has forced us to do that. And we want to still be able to do that. There's lots of things, and I think it's really important. It is that reflection. There are definitely key things. One is around our social, emotional, mental health learners. They engage better at 10:30. So actually, do we look at the start of the day? Do they have to be in school for 8:30, or do we change that to later in the morning and finishing later in the afternoon if we've got that engagement?
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I remember hearing from someone before, someone you'll know, Abdul, Bill, talking about how children's brains don't tend to wake up to about 10 o'clock, but here we have them sitting in the classroom at 8:30, 9 o'clock. So great point. Andrew, I'll pose the same question to you. Is there things that you will probably do more of as a result of, or less of even?
Yes, it's a fantastic question, and actually it's one we're asking ourselves right now. We've done the kind of like the what question in many ways, because we've done the deployment and we've worked a lot on that, the experience, and actually we're kind of now looking at the kind of so what and now what kind of elements of that. And I totally think the question's bang on the money in terms of the importance of reflection, because there's this element that we always focus on about developing a sense of urgency at the beginning of a project, about kind of developing a kind of coalition around about an idea and a vision and the strategy and all that stuff. And actually, I think right now where we're at in this pandemic, it's in almost kind of supercharged all those elements, if you like, to some degree. And the question now is about how do we maintain that? Because if we let that momentum sort of drop, then the research says essentially that to gain that momentum again around that same sort of core vision is very difficult. And at a time when teachers are going back to school and there are other elements kind of re-entering the education landscape, if you like, there is a huge challenge for us, and it requires us to reflect on what we've done well, what we want to keep, and how we kind of take that forward. And we're talking about our professional learning right now in the Borders, and essentially looking at, well, we've designed a professional learning environment for the world that has been in existence for the past year. And actually, that's not going to be the same world in the next year. And how do we look at that and reevaluate that and reflect on what's worked, and how do we bring that forward? And I think people will all be talking about a blend, the ability, and especially if you're in a rural economy like the Borders, a rural location, that importance of not asking people to travel needlessly when it's just as easy to join, and to be able to pick up ideas and watch them in your own time and watch them back, and be as flexible as we can to support the teaching staff, but at the same time to value where it is important to kind of have that face-to-face contact, kind of get right down into the guts of something with people that are like-minded, to wrestle with complex ideas, and to kind of come out with a strategic plan. And I think and all of us, I guess, are in the same boat with that. It is about talking about how do we to reflect on what we've done and actually take that forward. And that process of reflection is something that we're engaged in right now, looking at the metrics, looking at the data, looking at how what's worked and what's been beneficial and what hasn't, and then taking that forward into the next world. So I think that's a really bang on point about, it's not just about the strategy at the beginning, it's about the reflection all the way through and right now.
Another question there, kind of linked to that. Question is, how has teachers' roles changed, especially with the rise of personalised learning? And I think to extend that question on slightly is, how do you think teachers' roles might evolve going forward as well? And I'll put that question to Catherine.
I think in some ways they won't change massively in a school like ours, where we were doing a lot already. They were already creating content, whether it be as they were teaching a lesson, they were hitting record on their screens and it was going. But I do think in terms of more facilitators of learning, I think that as children get used to this new style where actually it's not an adult, at the front of a classroom, or in some cases at the back of a classroom, leading that learning, but actually they become the leaders, and they are sort of self-led, and that actually the adults within the room become facilitators more so than those leaders. That's obviously a massive learning curve, and training needs to go in around that. And I sort of, again, I suppose picking up on what Andrew was saying, our reflection on all of this is actually with all of the stakeholders. So we're not just having those conversations with teachers, but also actually with our parents, what works well for you and why. We've noticed an increase in our governance attendance, because actually being able to zoom in to a meeting is so much easier. But equally the pupils, actually, what works for you? What did you find beneficial? We've sat down and had some really interesting conversations with predominantly the older children, who are able to reflect much better on what worked well, and sort of trying to change things to work for them. And that access to video, where it is their teacher or it is something that they're used to seeing, provided that we regularly use, or equally that instant feedback. We use something called iExcel. So for maths and our grammar, punctuation, those sorts of things, the children are able to get that. It's almost that gamification, that instant feedback on how you've got on, and okay, I've got it wrong, I'm going to try again. But as they're doing it, the feedback that they're getting is explaining it to them as well. So it's not just a case of right or wrong, but this is why it's wrong and this is how you do it. And teachers knowing that actually that doesn't always have to be them, but there are things out there that will do that for them. But then their role is monitoring that and is facilitating that learning and checking in with pupils and making sure that learning is being moved on.
Thanks very much. Great answer there. Anyone else want to jump in on that? I do have sort of a follow-up question there as well, but I'll give you a couple of moments before Nope. Do you think...
I think Craig, just to
sorry, Abdul. Yeah, Abdul, please.
Add on to that. I think that just going back to that reflection piece, I feel like with the speed at which technology develops anyway, with the way in which we're kind of seeing, the EdTech industry change with new tools and new approaches coming out, I think that reflection piece is just going to be part of a continuous life cycle to the point, because we've always going to be at a point where we're going to have to look and reflect and think, what other tools are there now that allow me to do things better than what I'm doing at the moment. So I think that's something as part of a strategic approach to technology in education. It's something that it will always have to be revisited. Obviously, it's quite key now because of pandemic and the impact and everything that people have been through. But even when we're back to normal, if you want, it's something that's never really going to go away. And for an organization to be kind of effective, to be operationally efficient, that is going to have to be part of the kind of process moving forward.
Absolutely. And then a sort of follow-on question is, do you think that students' expectations, children's expectations will have altered as a result of how learning has been delivered over the past year? And do you think that, do you see that as a good thing? And Aaron, I'm going to bring you in here. I know we've not heard much from you today, so I'll welcome you to give your comments on that.
Yeah, I think that the IT has a massive role to play. I think they need to be really closer aligned to what's happening in the classroom. The children have got these fantastic tools in their pocket. They're used to that, the quick speeds, access to all the information that they that they have at their fingertips. And I think it's IT to really be more about enabling what's happening in the classroom and not being a barrier. Getting out old laptops and they take ages to log on. Children expect so much more, and actually being outside of school and learning from home, they've probably had a really great seamless experience. And as more and more tools are being bolted on, IT streamlining that process for them, so it's one login, it just goes straight to the apps that they need. I think that's going to be really important to really have a closer vision and planning session. It's always driven by the why. It's about the teaching and learning, and IT should always enhance that and not be a barrier.
Definitely. And then I guess from your perspective and your past roles, you have been someone that's helped implement technology. You've helped teachers implement technology into the classroom as well. And one of the questions that's got a lot of upvotes on there on the list is, well, and Aaron, I'll put this back to you. What's your best advice for teachers on overcoming the challenges of integrating technology into the classroom or whatever learning is happens to be taking place?
I think it's about, again, going back to IT, there's nothing more frustrating than trying to do something in your classroom and it's not working. Things are not working as expected. There's always a time when it's not going to work. But actually trying to get that IT person to sort of shift their role and become a tech integrator and understand what you're doing, coming and joining into those lessons and actually experiencing what you want to achieve. And then having those conversations and sitting down with them to say, like, this is what I want to do in my lesson. Can you help? And it's going to be a learning curve for them too. They're not used to probably some of these tools. They don't know how they work in the classroom. But it really needs to talk to each other so that we get the best experience for the users, the teachers, and IT can help empower them to do that.
And Catherine, I'll bring you back on this question as well, because you mentioned in your sort of opening sort of introduction that you had a role that was a sort of tech innovator at the local authority, and you were, I guess, one of the people responsible for helping teachers overcome some of those maybe challenges and barriers to using technology.
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest things would be to say, don't try to do too much all at the same time, and also keep learning at the core of it, because actually if the learning gets lost, then irrelevant of the technology, the lesson's not going to go the way you want it to. I was a teacher in the classroom, sort of doing it and learning as I went. And I think that's sort of the other side of it as well, is that kind of just being open to giving it a go and knowing that there are going to be times when it might not work. And yeah, sort of trying to stick with one thing at a time. We were in a position where, as I said, we had 30 devices. I then had managed to get myself one as well. And I would just play, sort of see what I could do with things. And then I'd sort of have it as a small part of the lesson and integrate it slowly. I mean, we're in the position we're in now, but we're 10 years on from that point. So yeah. I know that everyone else has kind of had it fast forwarded because they've suddenly had to do it. But in that reflection, taking that moment to sort of step back and think, okay, right, so of these things that we've done, which one has worked the best? Which one has had the most impact on teaching and learning? Let's focus our time on that and then build out from there, as opposed to sort of saying, right, we've got all these things, we need to try and use them all at once. I don't think that works particularly well. And I know that, I mean, when we first had those devices, and I got sort of very excited about apps, and we had loads of them, when we moved into the new building that we're in now, and we went one-to-one across Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, we at that point made sure that every adult in the school also had a device. Every adult had access to sort of core elements of learning, but then they could also themselves sort of have that bespoke time with, they could book sessions in with the IT person or with myself, and just to really sort of look at how they could use things. And also a lot of learning from one another. You know, we dedicated 10 minutes of staff meeting times to share things that have gone well, but also share things that have gone badly. You know, it doesn't always go the way it's meant to, and accepting that. And yeah, it has worked very well for us, but it has been a very long journey. And I think that's the kind of key to this, is knowing that you're not going to get to that point in a year. It's going to take longer than that, and it's going to be a case of planning it out very carefully and very strategically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that you mentioned about, you know, I want 31 devices and having your own device. And it just seems like an obvious thing, but I've seen so many examples of where, you know, the teacher had to go and pick one out of the car, just the same as the students. And it's probably still happens to this day. And also teaching assistants. And you mentioned all adults having a device. And I believe that's something that you've all ethos you've all had. On the sort of CPD side, there's a question, Jenny, specifically for you. Yeah, Jenny, you talked about reviewing what went wrong, resulting in putting in place a proper vision and plan with CPD. How did you approach this, and to get a plan that actually worked for you?
Yeah, I think it was really important. We looked at and reflected on what had gone wrong. So basically, we'd set it up wrong. We hadn't taken the staff team with us. We'd not invested proper CPD. We'd kind of just got some iPads and put them in departments, and there was disconnect. So, you know, if you were in maths, you got the maths iPads, and then you toddled off to English and you got the English iPads. So there was no ownership for the young people, that saving of work, that marking and feedback. And when we reflected, that was the wrong way. So we stopped, we accepted that hadn't worked. But what we did do is looked at what had worked. So there were higher levels of engagement. We had seen improvements in certain areas of maths and in reading. We'd seen fantastic engagement in science. So we knew something was working. We just hadn't got it right. And when we analysed that, it was down to the strategy, the CPD, and the ownership for the young people. Owning your own device that is yours, that saves your work, that allows you to showcase your work and access things when you want to. That was definitely the failure. And so that's what we put into our vision, but also broadening it to life skills. Actually, this is a tool for life, for young people to access the world out there, not just their academic education.
Yeah, great answer. Love it. Absolutely love it. We've got tons of more questions coming in, and I'm conscious that we've got just over 12 minutes to go, and I want to try and get through as many of these as we can. Another great question here. I love this question that just came in. If someone was to start from the very beginning, having never used any of the solutions that you discussed on here today, anything that you've mentioned already, what is the first thing that they should consider? And Abdul, I'll put that question to you.
Ooh,
blank page.
Blank page. I think you've got to start off. I feel you really got to start off with what impact and what's the return on investment that they're going to be looking for. So the return on investment obviously is going to be teaching and learning. It's going to be time efficiencies, cost efficiencies. These are the things that they're going to be looking at. But realistically, if we invest and we start investing in technology and education, our main kind of focus should be what's the impact that it's going to have on the outcomes for the children. So what is it that you're looking to improve? Where are the areas where you can maximize the best opportunities for children and so on? And I think for me, that's kind of the starting point. Yes, there's lots and lots of other things to kind of consider, but what are the things that the outcomes that you're looking for that's really going to make a difference in terms of teaching, in terms of the way in which the teachers approach things in the classroom, the way in which students can respond, give feedback and so on, the way in which parents are going to engage and be part of the whole kind of learning conversation and so on. So for me, it has to be a clear focus on where is the technology going to amplify the learning experiences? What is it that you're looking for in that area? And in many ways, for some of the projects that I've been working on, we've actually looked at research-based approaches and then applied technology to kind of amplify that.
Yeah, no, great points there again, Abdul. And a couple of comments, not so much questions, but certainly I think we'll spark some discussion. Following on to that, Abdul, Martin, hi Martin, thanks for joining us, Martin, part of the ADE community as well. He's asked, or he said rather, from his point of view, it's best is to start with a why, have a school vision, and clearly explain, to your point, what the intended goal is from that vision. Is that something that you would agree in your experience? I see quite a lot of nodding heads.
Definitely. I mean, the whole vision conversation is really quite key. There are schools that you can go into and nobody really knows what the vision is, or it can't be articulated, or it can't be explained. And sometimes it's not a bad thing to sit down again and kind of revisit the vision and say, hey, is this still our vision? Or was it something that was written down 100 years ago and that's what everybody's been kind of doing? So I think revisiting the vision, understanding what it means to all the different people, it's not a bad place to start.
And a linked question, I would say as well from Michael. Hi Michael, good morning, thanks for joining us. Michael says LAs or local authorities or governors, it could be anyone, want evidence of improved attainment. Michael says he thinks it's the wrong question, and does it provide conditions that enhance opportunities in pedagogy? And he wanted to get the thoughts of the panel on that. Andrew, I'll come to you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I get totally what Michael's saying, and often we're probably all in this situation that we get asked a lot. You spent X money on iPads, for example. How much is the attainment improved? As if there was a direct correlation, and actually it's a lot more complex than that. And I think we've unpacked a lot of the kind of key questions that need to be asked around about that this morning. The strategic planning, the decisions that we make, what tools we're putting in place, how we embed those tools, the teacher training and support and professional development that accompanies all of that. All of these are absolutely critical factors. And to go back to our introductions in the beginning, I think many of us have seen technology being put in and making very little impact, or sometimes even making a negative impact. And I think Jenny referenced that very powerfully in her introduction to herself there. So yeah, I agree with that. I think what is really interesting to me right now is to capture some of the impact of the technology around about these key projects. So looking at engagement statistics, looking at if you've planned a strategic intervention, also remembering to plan what is the baseline before you do that, and then how do you know that you've been successful? And that's just, I guess, examples of good practice. So although I'm nervous about anything that says technology raises attainment, because I think the middle gap is full of all the stuff that makes it work, at the same time, I think it's really important, if we're going to make strategic interventions, be they with technology or purely learning and teaching, that we look at how do we baseline, how do we know what we're doing is being successful, and if it's working, let's do more of it and let's do it better. And then if it's not working, and again, as Jenny very powerfully said, let's just almost look and stop, and then look at why, and actually look at what we do differently. And I think some of what we're doing right now at this particular moment in time is exactly that, you know, looking at what's working and what's not working. So I agree with Michael 100%. And yeah, I think there's some very powerful data out there now to look at why technology works and how it works best, for example, in education.
Craig, if I can just come in on that one.
Of course, Abdul, yeah.
I think when I think sometimes board members or people are asking that question, I think there's a degree of education potentially that's needed at that level, because, you know, it's at the end of the day, technology, software, hardware, whatever it is, the devices, the objects, you know, just by putting them in, you cannot say suddenly everything's going to be better or worse. Just like having tables and chairs in a room doesn't necessarily mean that results are going to go up or down. I think fundamentally what matters is the quality of teaching and learning that happens in the classroom. And that's really important to understand. And it's important for all stakeholders to kind of understand that. Yes, if you equip, you know, teachers with great tools and great training, and you invest in them, then the likelihood of, you know, great outcomes is going to be higher. And if we fail to invest in those things, then actually that can also have impact as well. So I think that question does come up from time to time, certainly with organizations that I work with, but I think it's important to kind of set expectations and get people to understand where technology fits in. It's and I think what Andrew said, absolutely right. You know, it's not a case of you know, everyone's looking for, hey, we put devices in and suddenly, hey, the results went up. Well, the results could have gone up for lots of different things and have nothing to do with the technology. So I think it's important to kind of understand, you know, the whole kind of approach to this and set expectations for stakeholders as well.
Yeah, no, great point again, Abdul. And I think we've got about 3 minutes left. I think I want to end in probably a big question. So we probably won't get time to completely solve this or answer this question, but we'll certainly try in the time we've got left. So the question is, and the comment was, thanks for an interesting conversation. Looking ahead to the future, what types of technology do you all predict will become essential in the next few years? And I guess I'll sort of add on to the end of that. And what do you think learning will look like within, say, the next 2 years? Let's not look ahead too far. And Jenny, I'll bring you in on this one.
Technology develops really, really quickly. So the answer of what it'll look like in 2 years, I honestly don't know. I think it will continue to enrich teaching and learning. I think the interesting thing for me is in the classroom, it's very much changed in a teacher stood at the front and young people sat down learning. Teachers sometimes have that subject knowledge, but not the knowledge of the devices. And our staff are really comfortable that actually a young person in the classroom knows their way around that device or that app much better than them. So we've seen lots of co-teaching with our young people, and that's really empowered them. And I want to look at actually the reversal of where we have been previous to this. But I have no idea where it'll go in 2 years. It's amazing how far it's come in this year during the pandemic, but I certainly think it's not going away and it will become better and smaller. I won't say bigger because everything seems to get smaller.
Yeah, we had that for a while. Phones got bigger, now they're getting smaller again. Andrew, any comment to make on that?
We have in the Inspire Learning Programme in the Borders, we have kind of 4 key pillars, if you like. One is personalisation, mobility, collaboration, and excellence. And I think in terms of where technology is likely to go, and what I'll certainly be looking for in terms of technology moving forward is very much an alignment to those kind of key principles for education. You know, increasing ability to personalise and to provide a personalised approach to learning. Mobility is going to be absolutely key. We can see that we need to be able to learn and engage in learning activities from anywhere, be that your home, your classroom, an art gallery, the sports field, wherever. Collaboration, obviously, again, has been critical for us over these past few months, and excellence. I still think that young people deserve devices that they want to learn on, and I think that's a powerful element still. So those 4 things to me are critical moving forward, and whatever the technology looks and feels like, I think for us it needs to align to those kind of key priorities.
Great. Big question, not one we're going to solve for today. So we're almost at the end of today's session. So I just want to thank everyone who joined, especially those that asked questions. Apologies if we didn't get round to answering all of your questions. I really want to say a huge thanks to all our panelists. Thanks to Aaron, to Abdul, Catherine, Andrew and Jenny. Thanks so much for sharing your insight, your experiences. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure those that joined in today or watching on the recording will have learned too. So thanks once again, and we'll connect with you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Craig.